So the story starts out and it goes through several rounds. So in round one, the deer of the first herd uh, basically went out, saw bait, ate it, got intoxicated, and indeed fell into negligence. And so the deer trappers are very happy, but the deer were not. So with the second deer herd, let's see, yeah, here the Buddha says, the first herd, acting without precaution, failed to get free from deer trapper power and control. How about altogether shun that bait, that fearful enjoyment, go out into the forest wilds and live there? But in the last month, oops, I got ahead of myself. So back up a second. Basically, deer herd number one uh, had a lot of suffering, and the trapper had a lot of joy. And the second herd the learned from the first herd, and they said, "Well, we got intoxicated, and we fell prey to the ills of intoxication and suffered. So let's learn from that." So they said, "Well, what if we, instead of just going out there, were more cautious?" So they kind of went all the way to the other side of what they first did. And so they said, let's shun the bait. Let's shun the enjoyment that it gave us, go out into the forest wilds and live there." So they live like some of the aesthetics that we often read about in the Buddhist teaching. But they after a bunch of months, they ran into a bad season where there was little of the food that was not the normal bait for deer. And it was very hot and they suffered greatly. So they said, well, since everything's used up and we're becoming emaciated and losing strength and energy, we better go back and take the bait, which they did. So even though they took precaution and had planned actions, things happened and they weren't able to sustain themselves. So the next herd said, well, the first and the second herds had some trouble. Uh, and essentially, the second herd was the one that said, well, I guess we have to eat the bait. So this is what brought about the figurings by the next herd, the third herd. And they said, well, what if we ate the bait warily and remained unseen by trappers, or at least tried to be unseen by trappers? So to be cagey, basically, to eat the bait, um, but to see if they could avoid becoming intoxicated and negligent. And the trapper said, whoa, these deer are getting harder to trap, harder to find. They're being more careful. Maybe we can arrange things so that they'll eat bait without our knowing uh, uh, about how they come and go. So this time around, there was some success with that. They hid, they were harder to find, but that still didn't keep them from totally avoiding the trappers. And part of the reason for that was even though they were doing better, they still were eating the bait and they were still in danger. So the trappers started saying, well, this is getting harder than we thought. What if we scared the deer and we alerted others uh, um, and uh, see if we could trap the deer. But this time around, the deer basically said, let's go where they can't find us. So essentially, the deer finally got free because they essentially weren't intoxicated, so they weren't subject to negligence, and they hid from um, the deer trappers. And the Buddha explains about this. He says, the first deer ate food unwarily, becoming intoxicated and negligent. So in this case, Mara and the circumstances of suffering won. The second deer shunned the bait and its enjoyment, but they lost strength and energy in the deliverance of the mind. They abandoned the resolution and they lost their meditative attainments. So they tried very hard, seemed like a good plan, but they couldn't um, they couldn't sustain it. And in fact, they experienced some of the joys of enlightenment, but uh, they lost them because it's a hard practice, and they still got caught. So in the final scenario, the Buddha then goes on to say what happens because they successfully avoided intoxication and negligence, and they were able to survive that process because they shunned the trappers. And he says, so this is how the process of becoming enlightened, learning each time from the mistakes they made occurs. And the other thing that was clear is it's a long process. A lot of people in current day don't really think in terms of lifetimes, although we're all curious about it. But essentially, the what the Buddha was trying to get across to them was there are dangers. You need to learn from those dangers and avoid them, and you need to continue until you've totally moved through the process of enlightenment. So I think this is sobering because we have a very black and white view uh, in some ways of how to be happy in Buddhism. It's easy to misunderstand. And according to this talk by the Buddha, it's easy to be caught and tricked and cave. So the sutra continues uh, and talks about the jhanas and the time it takes, the subtle stages of progress available. So I think part of what the Buddha was trying to help all of his disciples understand was this is at least a one lifetime process, whatever lifetime really looks like. That's kind of a concept that we have. So we have um, a more modern version of this in a book called The Misleading Mind by Karuna Ketam. And I think he's an American, but he trained in Tibetan Buddhism in Tibet, and now also became a psychologist. And his way of talking about things is a little easier for us to relate to than what the Buddha taught. I always like to read what the Buddha taught because usually there's depth and subtlety to that that isn't necessarily translated when we get more modern. But I really appreciate this guy, Karuna Ketan. And he says, okay, so what's the problem? He says, everyone has problems. What do we do with them? So that's kind of what we're facing every day, but it's particularly uh, vivid, I think, in the current time frame. We have some changes and some things that we've been used to that we know we're we're not still getting, and we have to adapt to the change. But they're big enough that we notice them and we can recognize the difficulty of that and the unhappiness that we can suffer. So how do we carve a path that we can stick to and that does lead to our enlightenment and equanimity? So what he says is, first, let's, you know, check in on reality. Life means suffering because everything changes, right? We get sick, we get old, we die. It's the five remembrances, whether we're enlightened or we're not enlightened. The five remembrances hold. So we are parted from everything that we care about, whether it's a person or a thing. And our deeds are our karma. So how we work with those is what um, we experience in our lives. And it's pretty easy to take refuge in ways that continue the suffering. So he says, life means suffering. Suffering arises from clinging through wrong perception, not random. It has a cause, that suffering. Suffering can be overcome, which is the Buddhist message. There is a way out, there is a path. And essentially, you can do this. He says, we have no real control to prevent pain and problems from arising. Nothing lasts. Everything is impermanent. It's so impermanent that we can't even hold it in our hand. It's that fast. That's how short a moment is. So impermanence is a truth. We can see it. It bothers us and cannot be rejected, just as gravity cannot be rejected. So we don't get to vote on gravity. Gravity is. And that's what he's saying about the truth of how our life is. Impermanence is. We aren't free to accept or ignore something like gravity, but we are accountable to understand and obliged to contend with it. He says basically, we don't really know what to do with this impermanence, but it's possible to learn and practice, just as the story in the bait taught the deer. But we do it through experience, and it's not necessarily our idea of what's fun. He said we have to assign the correct cause to begin with, which is our concepts. So our concept of what life is, both he and the Buddha are trying to get across to us, is not how it really is. Our idea of who we are and what that means and how we should navigate these conditions is distorted. It's hard for us to see clearly. But that doesn't mean that we're doomed to suffering. Pursuing pleasures doesn't fix impermanence. nor does denial and distraction. Those are the usual ways of most humans most of the time. I think we can all see that, but we can talk about that a little bit. However, we can say, even though I'm not free of impermanence, I have the ability to accept or ignore. I am accountable to understand and obliged to contend with impermanence, just as I would be in relationship to gravity. It's like one way or another, I can, I have to live with it. I can take the attitude that it's possible for me to understand and contend with it. And that's what the Buddha is telling us to, is trying to get across to us. We don't know initially how to understand the way out. But the facts of suffering as they really are, according to both the Buddha and Mr. Caton, we are continually experiencing physical discomfort or pain. We don't get to vote on that. It's just true. Life is always changing and unpredictable. We live as if everything were static. So we can really feel that in this time. I think we're seeing that with the president we now have. There's a lot of change. And for many of us, that's not a change that we're looking forward to. And for others of us, it may be a change we are looking forward to, but it will not mean that we can exercise an option of being free from impermanence and all the ways we exacerbate that because we don't understand what's really going on. So we're ignorant of the true nature of reality. We cannot control our own happiness. That's, I think, pretty important because we certainly are doing our very best to do that, even though we're continually experiencing that we can't control it. We're just continuing to experiment in ways that usually, for most human beings, are a lifelong source of suffering at one level or another. With a deep lived understanding of the true nature of our problems, which is what we don't come into the world with, all problems can be solved, for it is out of ignorance that all problems arise. We don't really understand impermanence. We don't really understand that we're not separate in any way, and we're not who we think we are. But it's possible for us to do that. So the Heart Sutra starts with essentially a statement that says, all aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. That's what we don't understand, and really any concept of that we have of it is distorted. It takes quite a bit of work and practice in order to change that, but it can be changed. And at least in the readings in the Nikayas, part of the way that changes is through multiple lifetimes. We're like a plant that sets out a lot of seeds. So one way or another, we're going to keep doing the same thing and experiencing the same thing, but knowing that there is a way, there is another choice, and then learning how to practice it and stick with it, even though, like the deer, it's not all fun and games. It's not instant. we can actually, he says, with a deep-lived understanding of the true nature of our problems, all problems can be solved, for it is out of ignorance that all problems arise. Our understanding of how to go about solving what we understand are our problems is misleading. So the only enduring solution is to confront the agitated mindset, which can be. So essentially, the Buddha's teaching is indeed um, to provide us with the opportunity to know complete and true um, equanimity and wisdom, to be joyous. And we see people that decide to take that up. And we're probably here today because we're some of those people. Even though we might not think we are, we've made the choice to say, well, I'm going to try this out. I'm interested. So what Karuna Ketan and the Buddha are all saying is first step into the understanding that it is possible for you to have a thoroughly satisfying, healthily satisfying life. And really the Eightfold Path, we're talking about right intention. So it says, I'm going to step out of my ignorance and work from the what the the understanding that there is a way, but it's not an easy way, and it takes a lot of work. Not more work than the suffering we're doing, but with a lot more happiness that accrues along the way. And I think I'd like to kind of leave it there. It's almost 10 o'clock now. And talk about, so how are you feeling right now? What's your check-in look like? And how do you experience, how do you work with your own doubts, your own unhappiness, your own frustrations? Because those are the ways that we can support each other. We all need help on that. We all are subject. I mean, for me, what I'm subject to right now when I check in, and this isn't always so, and it doesn't necessarily happen for a full day. And almost every day, I have an opportunity to feel a different way, to act a different way with a condition of impermanence. So let's talk about, if you would be willing to say, so what's hard for you? What's frustrating with you? What keeps you going in terms of your commitment to Buddhist practice? How is your experience of Buddhist practice as you understand it? So please raise your hands and share. I'm sure it will benefit us all.
Good morning. So interesting. I had never heard the story about the deer before, but some of those stories they ramble on and ramble on. He gets his point across eventually. Um, So change is unavoidable. It's built in to life just like gravity is, right? That was one of your points you're getting in there. Um, when I was a soldier, we'd be going out on a mission. We would get our instructions. You know, you're going here, you're going to do this, and blah blah. And the last thing they would say after the introduction or the explanation was, "Remain flexible." And just that phrase has stuck with me uh, from that time on, because we like to see things and understand them in certain ways. And we like to think that our understanding is pretty accurate, but of course, it's not always. Our understanding is not always uh, accurate. Uh, and that flexibility, don't get stuck in one spot because things are going to change and things are going to look different. And anyway, that's all I wanted to say is that remain flexible, and it helps. So thanks for your talk this morning.
Yes, it reminds me of Bernie Glassman's Don't Know Mind, which is another, he's got three principles: don't know mind, bearing witness, and appropriate action. So I think don't know mind is another way of saying remain flexible,
Yeah.
really flexible. Who else? Laura, I see a hand up.
Thank you so much for this talk. It was very timely. I was really struggling, particularly yesterday, over several things, and it was just great to hear. So thank you. And it reminds me, I'd never heard the story of the deer either. I loved it. It was wonderful, really hit home. It reminds me of the poem Life in Five Chapters, if you've ever heard of that.
I think I've heard of it, but I wish you had a and could read it to us too. It's
Oh, it's a bit longer, but to make it very short, it's much more eloquent than this. But I'll paraphrase. Turn down the street. I walk down the street. There's a large manhole. It's open. I don't see it. I fall in. It's deep. It's dark. It's not my fault. I can't get out. I don't ask for help. I'm in there for a long time. Second chapter, you turn down the street, walk down the street, you see the manhole, you still fall in. It's still not my fault, but I asked for help to get out. Right. So it kind of goes through this progression
yes.
of, how we have to keep doing things often, or for most things, and we learn a bit each time, you know. So it reminds me of that. And any rate, very timely. Thank you so much.
I have I have learned that story, and I love the last line, walk down another street.
I choose a different street. Yeah. In many areas of my life, I'm seeking to choose another street because it is one thing when, you start out not seeing and then you become aware, but just because you become aware doesn't mean it's embodied as much as you want it to be. Or even when you're in the middle of it and you're aware and it's embodied and you find yourself still doing something anyway. And at least for me, this self berating that can happen, like, what is the matter with you? Like, here you are again. So, at any rate, thank you.
Now that one of the things I like about that story is something that I really have done some effective retraining of myself, and that is to appreciate everything, because the mistakes are really the way we change, but we can't really do that uh, nearly as well if we're not looking to put them to good
Mhm.
good use. Mm.
There's always a gift in the suffering. There's always a gift in the challenge. Absolutely. And and you long for days where you can do
Yeah,
without the challenge.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've really gotten some much more of the time I'm able to say, okay, well, what good use are you going to put this to?
hmm hmm I think it aids in, at least it has for me, when I can engage with that and see that it assists or makes forgiveness of myself and others easier, letting go much easier. So yes, I agree with you. That is critical. It's critical to see, well, what am I learning here, or what's the benefit that I'm receiving from this, even if I don't like it. Um, there is always benefit. There is always something to be grateful for, usually multiple things.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah. Thanks so much, Laura. Who else would like to share or is willing to offer their experience for the rest of us to identify with? Be glad we have good company.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the talk, Kyoku. I'm going to try to be brief because the condenser fan will probably turn back on the fridge, and you might not hear very much. But yeah, can you repeat the last two scenarios with the deer, which probably reflects my current understanding or my current
Yeah,
place in life? But yeah, could you read those last two?
yeah, the last two were a little confusing, but in the actual when I don't do the condensed version, essentially what happened, we had part one, uh, you know, just disaster, but learning, and then we had the second one, and the third one basically. Um, they didn't they had food to eat, they didn't get caught, they didn't get intoxicated, they didn't neglect things, but they had views. And so it's like this is good and this is bad. And so uh, the Buddha in the talk actually gives a couple of paragraphs of views, and you begin to understand how that very human right wrong. It's like um and the arguments that ensue and the entrapment in views, right? So we're still very stuck in a way. That's kind of good news that we're there, because we're not in the first part where we're blatantly having a problem. And then from from there, he still goes on in the actual talk to talk about various stages, which where you've kind of crossed a line. If you can cross from having views that are this or that with um, without being don't know mind, right? But you are bearing witness, then you move through stages of understanding where you work your way into equanimity and ultimately to enlightenment, which of course the Buddha kind of had to refined because it had been not true for so long. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Kyoku, where is this story of the deer found? What sutra is that? Do you know?
It's in the big brown book, the Majjhima Nikaya, and
Chapter and verse or anything?
it's Sutra 35. I loved the title. I
In
just
the in the in the
in the Majjhima Nikaya, yeah, the big fat brown one that has all that good stuff. It's it's as hard as many of the other ones. I was able this time to put myself more easily into the mode of I can't read and I probably have limited time, especially if I'm a layperson, to listen to talks. So that made it a little easier for me to put it to good use, as opposed to being bothered by um, all the words that he used because he repeats everything. And of course, I'm sure that I would have been very grateful now that I'm 75. I understand what it means to not be able to remember things. So the stories, I think, probably partially because of repetition, but partially because they're really good stories that we're really interested in, are much easier to remember. Who else? Mr. Yonan.
Good morning, Kyoku. So, I think when I find myself having trouble sitting, for example, or thinking that my practice is not all that great, I come back to, as I'm reading, it always comes back to this. And your talk talks about it, kind of gets at it too, is that it's okay that it's not perfect or it's not, exact. It's okay. And in fact, um, Soryu Suzuki Roshi talks about a story where back in the day in China, people used to carry big jugs of water or honey on their head and walk along a path. Well, if they stumble or something and it falls off and breaks, he says, just keep going. Leave the mistake behind and keep going and keep practicing. So that's kind of where I find what keeps me going and keeps me focused on improvement and getting over mistakes and learning from the mistakes, but leaving them behind and not dwelling on them.
Yeah, it's hard to know for me anyway, where because dwelling, something I call dwelling, can look a lot different. So uh, one of my best practiced hindrances is oh let me see my list here. Torpor and sloth. And really, in some ways, it's almost the easiest hindrance, but it's the most alluring hindrance if you don't want to face something, or it's like uh, it, it's it's kind of, but it's really a very unfortunate waste of time. I think the other thing is it's hard to appreciate something you really don't like or that really goes against sometimes not even that big a deal. Somewhere I was reading, I think it was in Caton's book, about how we can go from having a preference to having an obsession. And he used coffee, and he said, so, first you like coffee, and then you decide you're going to try lattes, and then you only drink lattes from such and such a place. And then every time you drink a latte, you've got the standard that's in your mind And I thought it was really, so it's like, is it as good as it should be? So it was just a very easy way to understand exactly how we treat everything that we experience. We have opinions about it. And really, with the Buddhist teachings, we at least have the opportunity to recognize that we have an opinion and that we can put it to good use, or we can not learn from it at all. So there's another thing that's I'm being reminded of, which is the process. I don't know what kind of label it has, but you probably all heard it about. We go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. That's a little like becoming a Buddhist. And then we go from unconscious competence to conscious competence. So that feels like it's a good match for my felt experience of walking down the same street and falling to holes, that kind of thing. Yeah, and when I'm stuck, that's the hardest time to appreciate being stuck, to appreciate I want to give up. Um, and it makes me really appreciate, particularly if it does take, it's like at one point the Buddha says someplace, this wasn't in the sutra that I'm talking about, but he says Ananda has achieved what is it? What's the first stage?
Stream intro.
Stream enterer, which means he only has 7 more lifetimes to go. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, you know, it gives me a perspective of how throwing in the towel is just like a tragic experience. Really, it's so much easier, I think, to be able to appreciate the value of making mistakes and being unrelenting in your devotion to making good use of them one way or another, right? How many times have we fall down before we learned how to walk? I'm sure it was a lot for me. My mom used to complain that I would crawl backwards, get stuck under the couch. The dog would start licking my face, and then I'd start screaming. And so you can imagine how enjoyable that was for hers. And trying to teach me not to pedal backwards was also so I thought to myself, really, getting born is already kind of a big experience. If I can do that even once and then learn how to walk after all that, surely there's I can be clear and trust that I have the capacity to do this. But boy, giving up is always an option. Some people don't have that so much. Ryushin will talk about his dad just going off and saying, okay, well, this is needed, so I'll do it. And that I didn't come with that set of genes, so I'm having to train. I don't know how many lifetimes there are left, but somebody once asked me if I believed there were multiple lifetimes. I said, well, I'm in this one and I'm sticking to it until I die. One lifetime at a time, please. Yeah. Bree and your partner in Zoom, would you?
Yes, that's my daughter, Juno.
Hi.
We're
Hi, Juno.
very backlit. I feel like I'm part of the witness protection or something.
No,
But
it's just, reflects, how things seem out there. It's like, let's
yes.
put it to good use. Okay.
um, this felt timely for me as well. I've been working on travel plans, which I consider a like central core of my soul. It's medicine for me. And I was in an accident a few years ago or a year and a half ago. And so this is like my first time back at it. Um, yeah. And so have been, I had this trip planned, and then they implemented Americans and Canadians and blah, blah, blah. We all need visas, and I can't get my visa to go through. I keep getting it sent back. Um, and so I'm supposed to leave like Saturday, and it's uh uh still unclear like where I'm going. I may have to like looking at like do I just divert, which I've done in the past, but I've prepaid this whole thing, which is non-refundable. And so like I'm really detaching and meditating, and it's been helping a lot in like you know, so maybe it won't be what I expected. And I know this is a very material example, but maybe it won't be what I expected. The adventure I'm supposed to have is gonna happen. And so I
Or
that,
the other.
yeah, that flexibility piece has been really kind of jarring. Like, yeah, maybe midweek I'll have to pivot and find myself in Argentina instead of whatever. But it's just the stress, like of all of that and wanting to pigeonhole and like this is my itinerary and just kind of throwing it out the window and being like, well, I I don't know. It feels very parallel to falling in that same hole.
Yeah. Well,
So
it sounds like you're doing an excellent job of putting it to good use, and saying, okay, how can I put this to good use? How can I work with it and learn from it?
yeah. Yeah. So that's been, I guess, the more very literal physical uh thing in my life that's been like, okay, barrier, another barrier. Um
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
Because as soon as we say, I'm going for it, then we'll be conscious of the barriers arising. Well, there's so much stuff that goes on really in ignorance, ignoring, the disease of ignoring. That's one of my personal favorites, but I know that's pretty much a a big pot for all of us. And when we start getting willing, let alone able to um, what appreciate and put to good use every situation like it was a jewel, because it is. I mean, that's coming. That's a decision. No, that's right intention. Where we say, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to stick with it.
yeah. So we'll see how that plays out.
Congratulations. Yes. Come back next week and tell us how it's going, or send us a note.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and I'll put a note. I'll put a note for your safe travels and
Mm,
enlightening travels. That's what enlightening trip on our Giza Walter. And Giza will help you.
thank you.
All right. Well, I think we're in good time. It's time to shut up and listen to Carl tell us about things.
All right. Well, thanks, Kyoko. Thanks, everybody, for joining in here this morning. Next week is Ryushin Jan Fryer will be giving our talk. And for those who have joined us in the past, you've probably heard some of Jan's talks, always interesting, always engaging. Upcoming at Hokyoji, next couple months are pretty busy. Next weekend is the women's retreat starting on May 1st. From
Not too late to join.
That's true. Thursday to Sunday retreat. And then on the 14th of May is the Minnesota Contemplative Outreach Group. This is mostly a Christian group that does centering prayer. It's part of a national outreach effort on doing this. This is the second year that they're coming for their retreat. Then on the 25th is the Just Sitting retreats, which has turned out to be our most popular retreats. It's a 7-day, the 25th to the 1st of June. And the Just Sitting format is there's no Dharma talks, there's no study groups, there is no chores, there is silence and zazen, and don't tell anybody what to do. I think that's one of their big rules. And if you get tired of sitting, you can take a nap, you can go for a walk. Anyway, they come twice a year, and it fills up completely. Interesting. Then we've got a group from Minneapolis that sits in the park there. They're going to come down on the 12th of June. Fish Murphy from Clouds and Water will be here on the 18th for her own retreat. Mark Anderson, no, Gentle Dragon, Onryo, Laura Kennedy, she's got a retreat from the 25th to the 29th of Practicing the Way. And then Mark Anderson comes back for a Naturally Awake retreat on the 17th of July. So lots of things happening there. Please check out our calendar on the website. I think they got that back up and looking the way it's supposed to. So anyway, we will finish up with the 4 vows, and thank you all for coming. So
And we appreciate all your donations, and we need them too.
there we are. Yes, there is a donation link in the chat box. If you want to donate $1 or $2 to us, we would appreciate that. So, beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inescapable. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thank you so much. And